The Midnight Visitor. Sarah, a 28-year-old woman, lived alone in a cozy apartment on the outskirts of the city. She had always felt safe in her neighborhood, but that was about to change on one fateful night. It was a Friday evening when Sarah returned home late from a dinner with friends. As she approached her front door, she noticed something odd. The kitchen window was slightly ajar. A chill ran down her spine as she distinctly remembered closing and locking all windows before leaving. With trembling hands, she unlocked her door and stepped inside. The apartment was dark and quiet, yet something felt off. There was a lingering scent in the air, unfamiliar and unsettling. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to turn and run, but curiosity got the better of her. She flicked on the lights and carefully inspected each room. Everything seemed to be in its place, no signs of forced entry or theft. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there. After a thorough check, Sarah convinced herself it was just paranoia and decided to go to bed. As she lay in bed, every creak and groan of the old building made her jump. Sleep came fitfully, filled with unsettling dreams. Then, at the stroke of midnight, a loud creak jolted her awake. Sarah's eyes flew open, her heart pounding in her chest. In the dim moonlight filtering through her curtains, she saw a shadow at her bedroom door. It was unmistakably the silhouette of a person, standing perfectly still. Frozen with fear, Sarah watched as the shadow slowly began to move towards her bed. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused to respond. The figure drew closer, and Sarah could hear the sound of heavy breathing. Suddenly, the bedside lamp flicked on, flooding the room with light. Sarah found herself face to face with a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with wild eyes and a sinister grin. In his hand, he held a large knife that glinted in the lamplight. "Hello, Sarah," the man said, his voice chillingly calm. "I've been watching you for 3 days now. I know your routine, your habits. I even made a copy of your key while you were at work yesterday." Sarah's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. How had he known her name? How long had he been planning this? In a surge of adrenaline, Sarah let out an ear-piercing scream and leapt from the bed. She grabbed the lamp and swung it at the intruder's head. It connected with a sickening thud, momentarily stunning him. Sarah took advantage of his disorientation and ran for the door. But the man was quick to recover, lunging after her with the knife. They struggled in the hallway, Sarah fighting with every ounce of strength she possessed. The commotion alerted Sarah's neighbors, who immediately called the police. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Realizing his time was running out, the intruder made a desperate attempt to finish what he had come for. But Sarah, fueled by sheer will to survive, managed to evade his attack and lock herself in the bathroom. Moments later, the police burst through the front door. They quickly apprehended the man, who was still trying to break into the bathroom. As Sarah was let out of her apartment, shaken but alive, one of the officers made a chilling revelation. The man they had caught was a notorious serial killer who had been terrorizing the city for months. Sarah had been intended to be his final victim before leaving town. In the days that followed, Sarah learned more about her brush with death. The killer had been stalking her for weeks, learning her routines and planning his attack meticulously. If not for her quick thinking and the timely intervention of her neighbors, she might have become another statistic. Though Sarah's life was saved that night, the terror of the experience never truly left her. She moved away shortly after, unable to feel safe in her once cozy apartment. But the memory of that midnight visitor, and how close she came to becoming his victim, haunted her dreams for years to come. The attic noises. James and Mary Thompson had always dreamed of owning a Victorian-era house. When they finally found one within their budget, they were ecstatic. The old house, with its intricate woodwork and spacious rooms, seemed perfect for starting their family. The first few weeks in their new home were blissful. They spent their time renovating, painting, and making the space their own. However, as the initial excitement wore off, they began to notice something unsettling. It started with faint sounds coming from the attic, scratching noises that they attributed to mice or squirrels. But as days passed, the noises grew more distinct and troubling. Footsteps creaked across the attic floor late at night. Swept his flashlight across the space, illuminating dusty old furniture and boxes. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Then, a slight movement caught his eye. In the far corner, partially hidden behind an old armoire, sat a figure. James's heart raced as he approached slowly. The beam of his flashlight revealed a shocking sight: a woman, dirty and dressed in tattered clothes, huddled against the wall. The woman looked up, her eyes sunken and lifeless. She seemed both terrified and relieved to be discovered. James stumbled backwards, nearly falling down the stairs in his haste to get away. The police arrived within minutes. As they brought the woman down, the full horror of the situation became clear. She was identified as Eleanor Winters, the previous owner of the house who had been reported missing 3 years ago. The truth was more horrifying than anything James and Mary could have imagined. Eleanor's husband, a respected member of the community, had imprisoned her in the attic after a heated argument. He had then staged her disappearance and inherited the house, selling it to James and Mary before leaving town. Eleanor had survived on minimal food and water, sneaking down for supplies when she was sure the house was empty. The noises James and Mary heard were her attempts to call for help, muffled by the thick attic walls. As Eleanor was taken to the hospital, James and Mary stood in shock, trying to process what had happened in their dream home. The idea that such cruelty could exist, that a woman had suffered for years just above their heads, shook them to their core. They never spent another night in that house. The memory of the attic noises, now given horrifying context, haunted their dreams. They sold the house as soon as possible, but the experience left an indelible mark on their lives. Years later, they would still wake up in cold sweats, imagining they heard footsteps and cries from above. The Victorian house that was supposed to be their dream home had become a nightmare they could never fully escape. The case gained national attention, leading to the arrest of Eleanor's husband. But for James and Mary, no justice could erase the terror of those nights, listening to the desperate pleas of a woman they didn't know existed, trapped in the attic of their own home. The vanished girl. In the quiet town of Millbrook, 16-year-old Lisa Carter was known for her bright smile and kind heart. On a sunny Saturday morning in June, she left her home to meet friends at the local park. It was a routine she had followed countless times before, but this time was different. Lisa never arrived at the park, and she never returned home. The disappearance of Lisa sent shockwaves through the community. Her parents, David and Susan Carter, were frantic. They had always been protective of their only child, and the thought of her missing was unbearable. The police launched an extensive search, combing through every inch of Millbrook and the surrounding areas. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Despite the tireless efforts of law enforcement and volunteers, no trace of Lisa was found. The case grew cold, but the Carters never gave up hope. 2 years passed, and life in Millbrook had settled into an uneasy normalcy. Then, something extraordinary happened. Jenny Miller, Lisa's best friend, began having vivid, recurring dreams. In these dreams, Lisa appeared, looking pale and frightened. "Jenny, help me," Dream Lisa would plead. "He's keeping me in the old factory. Please, find me." At first, Jenny dismissed these as stress-induced nightmares, a manifestation of her guilt and grief over her friend's disappearance. But the dreams persisted, becoming more detailed and urgent each night. Unable to shake the feeling that these dreams meant something, Jenny finally gathered the courage to go to the police. Detective Mark Simmons, who had led the original investigation, listened to Jenny's story with skepticism. "I know it sounds crazy," Jenny said, her voice shaking. "But it feels so real. Lisa is trying to tell me something, I'm sure of it." Despite his doubts, Detective Simmons decided to humor Jenny. He knew of an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, a relic from Millbrook's industrial past. It had been searched during the initial investigation, but perhaps they had missed something. On a cold autumn morning, Detective Simmons, along with Jenny and a team of officers, arrived at the derelict factory. The building loomed before them, its windows dark and broken, ivy creeping up its worn brick walls. As they entered, the musty smell of decay assaulted their nostrils. They methodically searched the ground floor, finding nothing but rust and rubble. Just as they were about to give up, Jenny heard something, a faint tapping sound coming from above. They rushed upstairs, following the sound to a locked door. The tapping grew louder, more frantic. With a sense of both dread and hope, the officers broke down the door. What they found inside would haunt them forever. There, chained to a wall, was Lisa Carter. She was pale, malnourished, her once bright eyes now sunken and fearful. But she was alive. As paramedics rushed to attend to Lisa, the full horror of her ordeal came to light. She had been kidnapped and held captive by the factory's former security guard, a man named Frank Parsons. Parsons had been questioned during the initial investigation but had managed to evade suspicion. Lisa was reunited with her overjoyed parents, but the trauma of her 2-year captivity would take years to heal. Jenny's dreams stopped, but she was left to grapple with the knowledge that her subconscious had somehow known where to find her friend. The case of the vanished girl shook Millbrook to its core. It served as a chilling reminder that sometimes, the monsters hiding among us are all too real. And that in the darkest of times, hope can come from the most unexpected places, even from our dreams. The cabin in the woods. Mike Chen and his 4 best friends had been planning their camping trip for months. They were all avid hikers, but this was their first overnight expedition into the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. Armed with backpacks full of supplies and a sense of adventure, they set off on a crisp Friday afternoon. The first day of hiking was exhilarating. They trekked through lush greenery, over babbling brooks, and up challenging inclines. As the sun began to set, they found a clearing and set up camp, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows around a crackling fire. The next morning, they decided to explore deeper into the woods. The trail became less defined, and the trees grew thicker, blocking out much of the sunlight. It was Mike who first spotted it, a small, dilapidated cabin nestled between 2 giant redwoods. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate. The cabin looked abandoned, its windows grimy and its wood weathered by years of exposure. The door creaked open at Mike's touch, revealing a musty interior. Inside, dust covered every surface, but something caught their attention. On a rickety table lay the remains of a meal, a half-eaten sandwich and an open can of beans. The food looked fresh. "Guys," whispered Sarah, Mike's girlfriend, "I think someone's been here recently." Before they could discuss this, they heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps outside. Panic set in as they realized they were trespassing. Without thinking, they scrambled to hide, Mike and Sarah in a closet, the others under beds and behind furniture. The door swung open, and heavy boots thudded on the wooden floor. Through a crack in the closet door, Mike saw a large man enter. What he saw next made his blood run cold. The man was dragging a large sack behind him, and from it came muffled whimpers. The man dropped the sack and pulled out a woman, bound and gagged. She looked terrified, her eyes wide with fear as she pleaded silently for help. The man seemed oblivious to her distress as he busied himself around the cabin. Hours passed like days. The friends remained hidden, hardly daring to breathe. They watched in horror as the man ate, cleaned his weapons, and occasionally taunted his captive. As night fell, the man finally drifted off to sleep in a chair by the fire. Mike knew this was their only chance. He caught the eyes of his friends, silently signaling that it was time to move. Slowly, carefully, they began to edge towards the door. They were almost there when disaster struck. Paul, always the clumsy one, knocked over a stack of firewood. The clatter was deafening in the quiet cabin. The man's eyes snapped open. For a moment, everyone froze. Then chaos erupted. The friends bolted for the door as the man lunged from his chair, roaring with rage. They burst out of the cabin and into the dark forest. They ran blindly, branches whipping their faces, roots threatening to trip them at every step. Behind them, they could hear the man crashing through the undergrowth, getting closer by the second. Just when they thought all hope was lost, they saw lights through the trees. They had stumbled onto a main road. A car was approaching, and they frantically waved it down. The driver, a startled elderly couple, didn't hesitate to help when they saw the terrified youngsters. As they sped away, they saw the man emerge from the treeline, his face contorted with fury. Mike immediately called the police, who promised to send units to the cabin right away. The nightmare was over, but its effects lingered. The woman was rescued, and the man, a serial killer responsible for multiple disappearances in the area, was apprehended. Mike and his friends were hailed as heroes, but they knew the truth. They had been lucky to escape with their lives. The camping trip that was supposed to be an adventure had turned into a brush with pure evil. It left them with a chilling realization: sometimes, the most dangerous predators are not the wild animals in the forest, but the monsters wearing human skin.